to New York City, and I lived with Sean Puffy Combs for a year. But hey, it was curious. I got a chance to see some things.
Yeah, but you were 13. What were you seeing?
I went there to see the lifestyle,
right?
And I saw it, and it was, but I don't know if I could indulge and understand what I was even looking at. It was pretty wild.
You're a dad now. Would you ever send your kid to Puffy camp?
Hell no.
I mean, I'm 13 years old. I'm not here to party with you. I don't want to go to the clubs. Matter of fact, I'm too young to even be in here. Why you got me in clubs? There were a lot of things I seen, and a lot of positions that I think I was put in where I had to make very, very tough decisions in my life about who I would be.
Clive comes out and says the following. Yes, record mogul Clive Davis has identified as being bisexual. He publicly revealed in his memoir, this is not allegedly, he said it, the soundtrack of my life. At the age of 80, he also discussed in an interview with Katie Couric, expressing the hope that his coming out would contribute to greater understanding of sexuality. It's Clive Davis.
Moved to New York City, and I lived with Sean Puffy Combs for a year. But there, hey, it was curious. I got a chance to see some things. Yeah, but you were 13. What were you seeing? I went there to see the lifestyle, and then I saw it, and it was, but I don't know if I could indulge and understand what I was even looking at. It was pretty wild. You're a dad now. Would you ever send your kid to puppy camp? Hell no. I mean, I'm 13 years old. I'm not here to party with you. I don't want to go to the clubs. Matter of fact, I'm too young to even be in here. Why you got me in clubs? There were a lot of things I seen, and a lot of positions that I think I was put in where I had to make very, very tough decisions in my life about who I would be. Clive comes out and says the following. Yes, record mogul Clive Davis has identified as being bisexual. He publicly revealed in his memoir. This is not allegedly. He said it the soundtrack of my life at the age of 80. He also discussed in an interview with Katie Couric expressing the hope that his coming out would contribute to greater understanding of sexuality. It's Clive Davis. The Usher part that's a touchy situation, man. For years, Usher kept quiet. He played the game, stayed professional, and stayed in his lane. But now the silence is broken. Usher is finally ready to speak on what really happened behind the scenes during his early years in the industry, especially when it comes to the time he spent around Diddy and Clive Davis. And what he's revealing is not just shocking, it's disturbing. Usher did not just meet Diddy later in life, like most people in the business. He grew up around him. When Usher was still just a teenager trying to find his way in the music world, Diddy was already a force of nature. Loud and magnetic, but always surrounded by mystery. Usher was placed right in the middle of that world. He saw the parties. He saw the behavior. He saw the way people were treated when the cameras were off and the media was not watching. And some of what he saw, he admits, left deep emotional scars. He was exposed to things no kid should ever be exposed to. Things that left him shaken for years. Things he still cannot unsee. But it was not just Diddy. Clive Davis, one of the most powerful executives the industry has ever known, was right there in the picture. Most know Clive as the man behind countless legends. But to Usher, he was also the mentor Diddy looked up to. Clive had the power, the connections, the blueprint. And according to what Usher is now putting into words, that mentorship was not about making music. It was about control. It was about teaching Diddy how to mold young artists, how to earn their trust, how to pull them in with promises and dreams, and how to break them down and use them to fuel an empire. Usher saw it all. The way Diddy and Clive interacted, the conversations, the quiet instructions, the shifting power dynamics. It was not just about music. It was about manipulation, about shaping kids into stars, but keeping them dependent, about turning potential into product. And while most artists were too afraid to speak or too deep in the machine to even realize what was happening, Usher never forgot. He might have stayed silent for years, but now that he is finally telling the truth, it is clear that the world only saw the surface. The real story was hidden in those studios behind those closed doors and moments no one ever talks about until now. Lose her life, and I just found out this reading, and you still had that Mother Davis party. Yeah? The disrespect for Whitney. It's a shame 'cause of her drugs. It's the disrespect for that woman. I just found out you still have V, and that was his biggest artist ever. Bro, this is that sick. Clive Davis. Yeah. When Usher finally opened up about his early years in the industry, it became clear that Diddy wasn't the only figure who left a mark on him. Behind the scenes, there was someone even more powerful. Someone with the kind of reach that extended far beyond flashy music videos and platinum records. That man was Clive Davis. And if you really want to understand the full picture of what Usher saw growing up in the music industry, you need to understand who Clive Davis really was. Not the public image, not the cleaned-up version shown in feel-good documentaries, but the real man pulling strings behind the curtain. He's not what he seems. Back in the day, Davis was working with folk, rock, and pop artists like Janis Joplin, Bruce Springsteen, Errol Smith, and Pink Floyd. Davis was discovering and signing some of the biggest artists in the world. And he's the reason Columbia Records was on top of the game. Aerosmith even shouted him out on the track No Surprise and said, "Old Clive Davis said he's surely going to make us a star. I'm going to make you a star just the way you are." And on the track Straw, the Grateful Dead said, "We used to play for acid. Now we play for Clyde." Clive Davis was becoming one of the most powerful dudes in the industry. But then in '73, everything almost ended after he got wrapped up in some sketchy situations. Davis was making a lot of money at Columbia Records, but he still wanted more. And in '73, they fired him for stealing $94,000 that he used for his son's bar mitzvah. And later that same year, Davis was allegedly caught up in a massive drug ring, too. The FS went to the offices of Columbia Records and Paramount Records because some of the people who worked at Columbia were charged in an international heroin case. According to the FZ, they were moving weight all over Italy, Canada, and America. Davis was never officially charged in the drug case, but rumors said he was helping wash the dirty money coming in from the heroin business. And then he got greedy and stole the $94K that was allegedly made from selling heroin. It was a big scandal back then, and the news broke that Columbia Records even had a house pimp who would bring in hookers and drugs for the artists who were signed to the label. A lot of people didn't want to work with Clive Davis after he got fired. So the next year he started his own label, Arista Records. In 1993, Clive Davis and Diddy co-founded Bad Boy Records. It was framed as a brilliant collaboration between a seasoned music mogul and a rising hip-hop visionary. But according to people who were close to that world, that partnership was anything but innocent. Clive didn't just hand Diddy an opportunity. He handed him a blueprint, one that would teach him how to build power, how to maintain control, and how to mold people, especially young artists, into whatever the machine needed them to be. Usher, who had a close view of all this from a very young age, has hinted that what he saw left him disturbed. He was a kid trying to chase his dream. But he wasn't walking into a fairy tale. He was walking into a system. And Clive Davis, to many in the business, was one of the architects of that system. He was not just an executive. He was a gatekeeper, a power broker, and above all else, a teacher to those willing to play his game. Industry insiders have long whispered about Clive's darker side. While the public often sees him as a legendary taste maker who guided stars like Whitney Houston, Alicia Keys, and Bruce Springsteen, many behind the scenes have described him in a very different way. Cold, calculating, manipulative. And when he chose to invest in someone like Diddy, it wasn't just because he saw talent. It was because he saw someone who could carry out his style of influence in a whole new arena, hip-hop. People forget that Clive Davis had already been involved in some of the biggest scandals the music world had ever seen. He had a long history of questionable decisions from financial misconduct to shady industry deals. Yet, every time he got caught, he seemed to bounce back even stronger, landing another high-level position, launching another major label, controlling yet another crop of new artists. It's no wonder some believe he had more protection than most. The kind of protection that doesn't just come from lawyers or PR firms. When Usher came into the picture, he was young, talented, and full of potential. But instead of being nurtured in a healthy environment, he was placed in a world where power games ruled everything. He watched how Clive operated, how he whispered in Diddy's ear, how he set the tone for the entire label, and how that mentorship shaped the way Diddy began to run Bad Boy by always staying in control, by isolating the weak, and by creating a culture where loyalty was expected, but trust was rarely given. This wasn't just about making records. It was about building an empire. And Clive made sure the foundation was built on compliance. Artists weren't just performers, they were assets, and those assets were only valuable if they could be controlled. Usher, as someone who got swept up in that world early on, saw how the machine worked from the inside. He saw how young artists were groomed, managed, and pushed in directions that served the brand, not always their own growth. And behind it all, Clive Davis remained mostly invisible. That was part of his genius. He didn't need to be the loudest voice in the room. He didn't need to be the one on camera. He simply needed to put the right people in place, whisper the right instructions, and let the system carry out the rest. For every flashy, Diddy move on the surface, there was a quiet Clive Davis influence behind it. The scariest part, the way the structure seemed to keep replicating itself. New artists would come in dazzled by the opportunity, unaware of the control they were stepping into. Some never made it out. Others were broken down, used up, and pushed out the door once they no longer served a purpose. And while Diddy was often the face of this machine, Usher saw who helped build it, who taught it,